Well, hello, good afternoon, good day. I'm Dave Russell from Veeam, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Dale Hoffman from IBM. Dale, hello and welcome. So we're going to be discussing today making an impact with cloud data management, Veeam and IBM jointly. And to tee that up, we've got a couple of different conversations points, but before we go really any further, do want to just mention a little bit of housekeeping items about this webinar. You're automatically muted on entry. If you do have questions, just use the GoToWebinar Q&A for chat. We'll try to get to as many of those as we possibly can. And we'll post and send the recordings out along with the presentation following this webinar. So Dale, IBM's cloud capabilities, as we see right here, are quite numerous. Maybe take us through a little bit of all that IBM has to offer here.
Yeah, and thanks, Dave, for hosting me for this. Really looking excited to this webinar. And notice I got my I'm going green with Veeam on.
Very
so
nice.
yeah, there's a lot of different aspects of the IBM cloud that are shown on this slide. And just at a high level, there's many different infrastructure options. We have our bare metal offerings with our VSIs. We have a VMware offering, our next-gen infrastructure, hyperscaler VSIs, and even a power platform that's on there, as well as a whole multitude of cloud services. Too numerous to have me talk about all of them, but I'll mention just a few. A HyperProtect crypto service, which gives you the highest level of key encryption protection in any cloud, leveraging our IBM mainframe technology. Bringing Red Hat OpenShift onto all of our platforms. And then something I'm really going to be excited to talk about at the end is some new things that we have just done with financial service cloud. But what's interesting, if you look at this chart, is how prevalent Veeam is across all of our platforms. Now, we have essentially it in VMware and our bare metal, and most recently in our power and our next-gen infrastructure. And we've had some incredible growth. I mean, we started about 3 years ago, and we're already up to about 20,000 VMs that are protected by Veeam. About 90% of it is on VMware, but I think it just shows you the overall breadth and the scale at which Veeam is part of our backup solutions in the cloud.
Yeah, that's outstanding and quite a complement of public cloud services there from IBM. Now, if we click a little bit more of a finer use case, you did mention, Veeam and VMware on IBM Cloud. Maybe take us through a little bit of that.
Yeah, and these are just 5 use cases that are very, common on the IBM Cloud for VMware workloads: a hybrid cloud transformation, application modernization, risk mitigation and compliance, and then our migration to SAP HANA. But one of the most important ones is what are we doing on overall resiliency solutions for data protection, disaster recovery, and high availability within our MCRs. And this is really where Veeam plays a very predominant role in our VMware offering.
Outstanding. And I'm just going to take you through just a little bit from a Veeam perspective. Won't try to bore everyone with numbers if you're not familiar with Veeam, or even if you are. Veeam, certainly it's now 12+ year history of shipping availability products, grown quite a bit, now 375,000 customers globally, well over 160 countries at this point, last year surpassing $1 billion of software revenue. But, Dale, one of the things I always like to mention about Veeam, if people aren't familiar with it, is the very same copy of code that I run on my ThinkPad to back up that instance is the exact same code that major organizations deploy at enterprise class scale with one copy of Veeam. And the difference is, much like when IBM deploys Veeam, that software-defined capability, being able to deploy, in this case,
Mhm.
Veeam in the IBM cloud really has a number of advantages. And some of that really stems from some of the core design tenets. And simple, flexible, reliable is something that's always been in product management and R&D's minds. The flexible is exactly what we're here to talk about, Dale, is the flexibility to deploy Veeam with IBM Cloud in a way that makes sense for the best business outcomes. And those shift, as we've seen. No one could have anticipated 2020 was be quite what we're experiencing now, but that flexibility, and while still offering reliability and resiliency, is where I think the two really partner up very well to
Mhm.
deliver customer value. So
Yep,
maybe now
I
we
agree with that.
click a little bit on that. You know, from a business continuity perspective, I'm just going to set the stage, and then I really want to pick your brain, Dale. Veeam earlier this year completed a global survey at about the end of January. So it was really as the pandemic was beginning to take shape globally. But when we asked then IT professionals, and there were 1,550 of them, a mix of what we call executive decision makers and technical decision makers, where we asked them as they were just entering 2020, which of these things do you think is going to be the biggest challenge? If we were to redo the survey today, Dale, I think the mix could be a little different, but there's no doubt that we're all concerned about cyber threats. Cyber doesn't
Yep.
discriminate, meaning every business, every vertical, every country is affected by this. And then we get into skills issues and leadership and economic uncertainty. But,
Mhm.
I'd love to get your thought if we narrow the aperture just a little bit. What do you see as the data protection challenges you hear from the C level, the CEO, the CIO as examples?
Yeah, and certainly the things on your survey are a lot of the things that are on everybody's, mind. But certainly this global pandemic, wow, I mean, look at all of us. We're all at home and
Yeah.
participating in this webinar. Who would have thought that this would have happened? But, it's really reduced our ability to go into the office. And if you think about it, you got all these people that are working remote. And it kind of raises an issue. How do you protect the data? How do you protect the network?
Yeah.
And as more people are working at home, some of these poorly secured networks are becoming a point of failure. And I think this is where cloud and Veeam kind of combined together can really help, because you can move from, I'll call it this proprietary data center, leverage equipment that somebody else, has, and essentially be able to protect those, self-service endpoints from a work at home using a backup service. So a lot of, I think, benefits to customers that are essentially, stuck working at home, leveraging IBM Cloud, working with Veeam. When it comes to maybe like a move to cloud, I mean, one of the things you need to do is you need to process maybe, how am I going to do this? I'm not going to maybe move everything at once. I may want to stage it out. I need to make sure that my, primary site is going to be kept in sync with my other site. And I think one of the really good examples, and we'll allude to this moving forward later in the presentation, is how we were able to leverage like Veeam Cloud Connector as a replication technology to help people move some of their VMs from an on-prem over with vCloud Director into our IBM Cloud. Now, you mentioned the ransomware and such, and
Yeah.
it doesn't discriminate, as you said. And this is kind of frightening, because you may back up and you say, "Oh, I'm good. I'll just go to my backup." But what if that is dormant? Let's say 6 months, could be less, could be more. And then all of a sudden, it just decides to wake up. It could be devastating to a business. So I think the good thing is Veeam does a really good virus scan on backup on the data that's coming in, so I can search for a lot of those unknown problems. And I know moving forward, Veeam's working on some immutable storage or data that can't be changed, so you can be really careful that it doesn't get corrupted. And then later on, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the services aspect that I think IBM could work together with Veeam's technology with our customers to help them in, cyber, recovery. Just kind of moving on next on the list, compliance. And this is very, very important, especially in a lot of these regulated industries. And let's just take GDPR. I mean, the fines, if you miss something here, are astronomical for companies. And by the way, even as a backup service provider, you may not even know what data that you're backing up. So you got to be very, very careful on this. And this is where a lot of role-based access controls really comes into play. And on the IBM Cloud, we have a really, really good partner solution where we can determine what are those role-based access. We can determine who are the privileged users and what we allow them to look at and what we don't allow them to look at. And I think that's just very, very important, especially as there's more and more regulations and more compliance that's coming into play. And skills and automation, I'm going to kind of combine them together because I think this is really where Veeam shines because it's relatively easy to use. We hear this feedback from a lot of our clients. Because of its easy use, it reduces a lot of your labor or your operating expense. And the fact that we have taken very, very special care to take the Veeam and automate it within our IBM Cloud. So when you're deploying our infrastructure and VMware software-defined data center stack, by leveraging this automation, it cuts down on a lot of just errors that you can possibly get. Yep. And I think the last point on this chart is this digital transformation. And there's a whole bunch of things you can talk about, but I'll just pick one. And it may sound kind of strange in this day and age, but there's a lot of regulated industries that still put some things out on tape. That's hard. It's hard sometimes to find those tapes. It takes a long time to bring them up and get them operational. And if something happens with that software, or even if the hardware that loads these things goes bad, those parts may be obsolete. So I think you're seeing a very, very strong push to move that into digital content. And certainly Veeam, even backing up into things like cloud object storage, I think it gives you a real good solution and can help a lot of CIOs in terms of their overall data transformation.
Yeah, totally agree. Great points. From my perspective, it really comes down to a balancing act between cost, capability, managing that complexity, like you mentioned, with skills and automation, but forever.
Absolutely.
How do you embrace the cloud going forward? That directionally is where every business is headed. And double clicking on that, a lot going on this slide, but we can maybe kind of parse it out into pieces here. You've got some interesting data, Dale. I don't think anyone would argue directionally more of us are going to be embracing the cloud, but you've got some actual data here to back that up.
Yeah, and I think if you take a look at the chart here, I think it's showing the trend that a lot of people are starting to back up to the cloud. I mean, even just look at our growth with Veeam, that we've gone from 0 to 20,000 VMs in 3 short periods. So I think it's the trend, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But, first of all, you have the geographic diversity that you've got data centers all over the world. And by having multiple data centers, it helps people determine where they want to back up. You can add resources dynamically. That's one big advantage of the cloud. So if I need to increase my amount of storage, I don't have to go in and, get that CapEx. I can leverage an OpEx type of model and scale up or scale down as needed. And then, as we had talked about before, this overall reduced management overhead because of the product's ease of use, I really think that, that just helps lower those operational expense and brings up the point that you brought about in terms of the costs are, increasingly important to a lot of our customers these days.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the times we find ourselves in, economic penny pinching is going to be a reality well into next year for many of us. And if you don't fall into that category, you're very fortunate. But finances will matter. And if we put a little bit finer point on data protection use cases, one of the things that the pandemic has done, certainly, you alluded to, Dale, was now the shift from work from home. Some of us might have been used to doing that. Some organizations were maybe a little more accustomed to that, but a whole lot of organizations globally now are just thrust with literally overnight having to adjust to a completely different kind of work environment. So, work from home and the rest of these things, take us through a little bit of what you're seeing there.
Yeah, and these are, I did a little bit of research into this, and compliments of Gardner here. They had identified these 5 use cases, and they personally resonated with me in a lot of discussions that I've had with a lot of our clients and such. So again, just reiterating what you just said, in this global pandemic, we got a lot of people that are working from home, they're using their own devices. How do you go in and back things up? How do you go in and kind of make sure that you're, securing that work from home endpoint? A lot of people now are using these SaaS applications at home, but a lot of them really don't have those backup solutions integrated and as part of that. So a backup solution provider can actually help solve that type of problem. And then if you look at a lot of these remote branch office type of locations, what's really interesting here is you got many of them. Do you want to have a backup at every single one of those? Or is there an advantage of being able to do this within a centralized location? And I think that's really where cloud shines, because now I can have this in a centralized location. I don't have to have a lot of equipment on site. I can leverage somebody else to go in and operationalize, this for me. And then kind of like the last two are, just backing up what you have on the cloud. And one of the big advantages, what IBM does, is we don't charge for any of the intercommunications from a network bandwidth standpoint between any of our cloud sites. So if you're doing different things, you can move things from one data center to another data center and not incur any charges. And then the last one is just protecting things on-prem. Look, there may be people that want to still keep things on-prem. Like you said, same code base, works on-prem. There may be people that just want to eventually just say, I need to go and move everything directly onto the cloud. So in this use case, I think leveraging Veeam on the IBM cloud really provides them a variety of options that best fits their business needs.
Yeah, and if I look at all of these things, I like these 5 use cases in particular. It really shows it's an expanding landscape, right? It's not a situation of we turn one thing off and turn another on. It's really, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing, and on and on.
Yep.
And I think if we kind of put a finer point on it, where Veeam and the cloud data management comes together, part of the challenge historically has been around just the difficulty, unfortunately, just trying to get these systems stood up and then keep them up and running well, being highly functional. So that overall degree of difficulty, which leads into cost, which, as you alluded to, leads into skills issues, the inherent sort of friction that was usually present in availability systems has really dogged the industry for all 31 years that I've been in it. But what, I'll let you take a couple of these in particular. I love the third one, but what, from a Veeam design philosophy, mentioned that simple, want to be flexible, obviously want to be reliable, but I think the real power starts to become when we get this combinatorial effect of Veeam and IBM Cloud. Maybe take us through a couple of these other bullets here.
Yeah, absolutely, and do that. So I think this is feedback that we've gotten from a lot of clients. So basically have said that, these backup products are hard to install. Now, if I could kind of take your slogan that it just works, that's pretty much the feedback that we get. It just works. It's easy to use. The cost, as you had alluded to before, is very, very crucial. So setting up the Veeam environment, there's a lot less overhead, and a lot less in operations to operationalize it and run it. And then if you think about how do I want to back up, there's a lot of cost-effective ways to back up. Maybe I want to be able to keep some things in local storage for a little bit, let's say 2 weeks, and then eventually maybe move it over into cost, kind of lower my costs. Or, as we talked about in this digital transformation, this ability to say that, well, let's not maybe go to tapes or use tapes. Let's try to go in and leverage costs as a really, really cost-effective way of getting that data retention that is needed for a lot of customers. And again, just seems easy to use. It writes directly to IBM costs, and this is really where a lot of our clients are taking advantage of that. The other thing is that people sometimes are looking, I do not want to manage my backup. I don't even want to maybe manage my DR. So how could they go in and look to somebody to help them? And this is really, I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, I think a really good partnership with IBM and our resiliency team that we can kind of run that for them. And then, of course, we know the data is growing exponentially. There's no doubt in my mind on that. And the feedback that we've gotten is we haven't really seen any scaling limits with Veeam. And the fact is that it's backed up, it works, and your data is always there when you need it, I think is a very important thing. And I'll make one other point that's not on this chart, and it's a little differentiating for IBM. And it's really about the fact that Veeam is a hypervisor-based technology. So the fact that we in IBM Cloud, we give people access, direct access into that hypervisor. So they really have total control of everything on that system and all the flexibility that they have with that. But it really allows us to go in and really take advantage of some of the functionality of Veeam in our cloud and run some advanced features such as short replica and short back. So a lot of really good things that I think that there's some good synergies between what Veeam provides and what we provide for backup on our IBM cloud.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned the lack of opaqueness. It allows, because of IBM cause getting full capability into the hypervisor layer, it allows the full functionality of any companion solution to really be leveraged. And
Absolutely.
double click on that a little bit, while we're talking a great deal about cloud, for most of us, it is going to be a journey. There will be on-prem workloads that remain, and there can be very good reason for that. It's not a good, better, best situation. It's really a question of what's right for your business at this time, what's right for that workload in your business at that time in particular. So I like this sort of spectrum, right, from on-prem to cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and then, as you pointed out, fully managed. We can jointly offer capabilities that can really check all of those boxes, but maybe take us through some of these in particular.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. It's that whole full spectrum of capability. So if you want to keep things on-prem, essentially, from an IBM technology, standpoint, we have our servers and our storage. But if you want to go off-prem and you can back up on-prem to off-prem, you can back up cloud to cloud, you can back up within the cloud, however you want to be able to do it. And the fact that we have Veeam running across a wide variety of platforms, like I had talked about further, again, it's all about choice and flexibility, which is a key aspect of when you're moving to the cloud. And then, of course, being able to say, we can manage it for you, manage that backup as a service for you to make it easier so you don't have the overhead and the operational costs. And one other thing I think it's really important on this slide is that IBM was given this Veeam Innovation Award. And we're really, really proud of that because we've worked very hard and built this partnership and really built some differentiating solutions with your products and our services on our cloud.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I reviewed all of the submissions in the Veeam Innovation Awards, and what IBM's done is very, very powerful. And you mentioned flexibility. I mentioned flexibility. We can't really overemphasize that. But part of that flexibility is really pulling out any of the friction from reducing these solutions. And in particular, I think
Hmm.
that's what sets IBM apart. And it's been really a very, very wonderful partnership that's taken off very, very rapidly. Let's now dive into look under the hood a little bit. From a one will see it's a highly technical diagram, but it's going to kind of be a little more solution oriented than where we've been at today, just to kind of give people a feel for how does this actually work, or how could it be consumed.
Yeah, and there's many use cases, but we happen to pick this particular one. And I think the value prop of this use case is I've got my data and it's on prem. However, I want to not have the overhead of the backup and some of the other cloud advantages that we talked about earlier. And I want to be able to back up onto the IBM cloud. So what we're showing here is this on-prem to an off-prem where we're leveraging VMware's vCloud, director technology. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of set up that Veeam replication gateway between the on-prem and then the off-prem. And then next, what we would do is we're going to move that data over there. So now I've moved it from on-prem over to off-prem. And then following that, wait till our animation comes in. Now we have a failure. We have something that happened, some event. And what I want to really be able to do is go in and recover and run that on the overall on the IBM cloud. And what's really key here, especially with the VCD technology, is when I move that VM over, I paid for my compute, and I paid for my storage, and I'm done. Now I'm just paying for the storage. Now when I have the event of this failure, and now I got to bring up my DR environment, I now bring it up on the cloud, and I start to pay for the compute. So the net effect is it's a very, very cost-effective way of leveraging Veeam on the IBM cloud for resiliency purposes.
Yeah, that elasticity, that on-demand notion, I mean, that's one of the areas where cloud services really excel. And then from an IBM perspective, again, offering that full functionality to be able to get all of the richness of companion solutions like Veeam really provides a more seamless customer experience.
Yes.
So we've alluded to it, but there are a few specific kind of capabilities IBM Cloud and GTS resiliency, and maybe even help define GTS for some of us that may not know.
Yeah, I can do that. So first of all, if you think about it, you can do what we'll call just self-serve backup. So in other words, I want to back up on-prem to off-prem. I want to back up cloud to cloud. The technology and the automation is set up to enable you to do that. But I think one of the most powerful and extremely good capabilities of IBM is our services team. I mean, they have decades of experience working with VMware technologies, working with various resiliency technologies. And what we were able to do is marry their level of expertise to the IBM cloud with the Veeam products. And it's the combination of those three things that I think, really adds something that's hard to replicate in other clouds because of this high degree of expertise that our services team has. So let's just think about just doing backup as a service. Now, we announced this with Veeam actually last quarter, and it's a fully managed backup service where we'll, run it for you. And we get a lot of clients that are saying, look, I don't want to run it. I really want you to go in and run this for me. Or they may look at it in a hybrid environment, could be on-prem, on our cloud, on other clouds, and say, can you manage that whole hybrid backup story for me so I don't have to worry about it? So I think it's a very, very powerful, differentiator. And then cyber recovery, that's on there. So we talked about that. So this is about how do we integrate Veeam into our cyber resiliency product. Now, this ransomware is becoming more and more sophisticated. So
Yeah.
this is where IBM can come in and really help manage this for a client, kind of like manage it from a clean room environment. And while we always think about a lot of these, type of attacks, a lot of times, many of them are inside. So we talked a little bit before about controlling that role-based access to prevent some of that. So the way our services team approaches this, they have a concept that they just call, very simple, the 3 Ps: people, process, and product. And it's really the people that is the key differentiation here, because they've done this before, they understand this, and because these ransomware attacks are so complex, they'll actually sit down with clients and do practice sessions. Hey, let's force something. What would you do? How would we do this together? So we can simulate that attack. And that's not easy. You need the people, you need the subject matter expertise to do that. You need a cyber recovery process. And then lastly, you can use Veeam as the product to essentially provide that data protection and such. And the next one on there is just doing DR as a service. And Veeam is getting a lot stronger in DR, especially with the upcoming product Veeam 11. And I'll talk about that maybe towards the end. But basically, it's approaching near zero type of recovery, which is really, really important, especially for the enterprise clients that have a lot of this mission critical data. And like I said, think back a couple slides ago to that example that I had done where you were on-prem and failing over to, off-prem, and being able to leverage, only pay for the compute when you need it. And then in the event of a DR or a test, that's when you spin that up. So really economical way of doing that. And now, what would be the next step to do? The next logical step is to orchestrate this.
Yeah.
Orchestrate this DRaaS environment with Veeam VBR. And I think what's really key here is now you can orchestrate this across multiple clouds. In a way, IBM becomes the orchestrator of orchestration. And I just think that these 4 things here really combine the power of what Veeam brings to the table, what IBM Cloud brings to the table, and what we can bring to the table for managed services and helping people have a good, resilient environment and one that we can stand by.
Yeah, I love that. And towards that end, you've got a couple specifics, meaning some customer examples. We've got a slide on each. Maybe you can kind of take us through what was the experience like, and what was kind of the challenge solved?
Yeah, I mean, there's many examples that I could have picked, but we picked these 2. And the first one is Mobius. And they're a multi-service line provider where individuals have personal and professional numbers on a single phone. Now, they work with a lot of large telecommunication companies. They work with a lot of financial service companies. So what we did is, working together with Veeam, is we put a solution together so that Mobius deployed VMware in 4 locations for production and 2 for DR. And because we were able to give them that full bare metal and hypervisor access, we were able to meet a lot of their compliance requirements that they had given us. And the fact that we could freely move between like maybe a production and a DR center, whether it was testing or an actual DR event, and not charging for that networking bandwidth, it became a very, very powerful value proposition for Mobius using Veeam on our IBM Cloud. And I can maybe share just one more example with you.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and that's AnyCloud. And AnyCloud is a Danish company. And I actually met them last year at VeeamON and had a really good chance to have a talk to them. And what they do is they provide a Veeam cloud service provider. They provide the backup as a service. They provide the DR as a service. But they didn't want to go out and build a lot of data centers. They were looking for a partner. Their core competency was that backup and DR service. So we were able to build this service with them so that they can service their customers in about 45 different countries. And essentially, they leverage the IBM cloud to build these new data centers so that they can provide those resiliency services for their client base that was worldwide.
Outstanding. Yeah, and I see the global map there, and you mentioned, I think it's some 34 different locations that IBM Cloud operates in, and not having to pay a cloud tax from when you go and geolocate or geo-relocate, I think is really amazing.
Yeah.
So let's transition now just a little bit as we kind of go through a final segment here, and take us through now. You've got something about IBM and VMware regulated workloads. Maybe help us, understand that. Financial services is obviously one of the most regulated industries or verticals in any, imaginable environment. But this is an interesting chart, I think, to go through.
Yeah, and I have a couple slides, and I mean, this was something we're extremely excited about. So let me just kind of start up at the the top level here. What we wanted to do is provide a rock solid solution for these regulated industries. It could be finance, it could be insurance, healthcare, life science, whatever it happens to be. So we started out with financial services. And we built something called the policy framework. And basically what we did is we leveraged our acquisition we did several years ago with Promontory, who has this worldwide domain knowledge of everything that's going on in all of these type of regulations and changes that come about, and what it means to be compliant and such. And we were able to apply that to a set of several hundred, in this example, banking controls. So now we had this set of proprietary banking controls that were near and dear, that pretty much run, banks. So now what we did is we mapped that into a policy framework. So now we have this, call it a common playbook that we would get all to abide by. And we can use that policy framework, which is really based on a lot of the NIST regulations. And now we can kind of attach that over into a reference architecture. And within that reference architecture, it allows us to show that concrete evidence that if you can go back a slide, please. It allows us to kind of show that validation of those controls, and that we can show the evidence and such that's on that. But it's also even a little bit broader than that, because a lot of these banks, for example, they have many ISVs that they're working with, and it takes a long time to go through and validate from a compliance and security standpoint that these applications are not going to violate any of their controls. So by building this ecosystem and having all these other ISVs kind of on board, following that policy framework, and testing and validating and showing the evidence with our reference architecture, it makes the onboarding of those ISVs into banks so much easier. And you open this up to many banks and such, it just makes it a lot easier. And then you get that trust in the sense that you're on the IBM cloud, which had a myopic focus on how do we handle the security and compliance nature of this. And let me just flash real quick. This is a block diagram solution of what that regulated workload architecture would look like. And so it's built on what we call a zero trust type of model. And we try to really go in and create these air gaps. So the people that are, for example, running everything in a management cluster, where we're trying to, manage all of the monitoring, the logging, the security policies, the role-based access, determining who can get in. All of that is kind of separated from the workload clusters. And that was done on purpose. So we have these three separate clusters that are in there. Thus, you can run your workloads. They can be running on virtual machines. They can also be containers running in a OpenShift Red Hat environment, running on virtual machines. But the area where Veeam plays a critical role is in our management cluster. Since we've got vSAN up there, it allows us to go in and do the backup of the data in the VMs. We also can do the same thing in the workload clusters if the clients wanted to go and back up all the data in their workload clusters. Or you can leverage VM from a resiliency standpoint if you wanted to do some offsite, backup and DR. So Veeam became a, very, very important part of a very broad initiative that we have put in place with this IBM Cloud for regulated workloads, with a myopic focus on security and compliance in this reference architecture.
That's outstanding. I really like that a lot, and it solves real-world problems. We mentioned how every business is going to be a bit unique, but there are certain commonalities, especially in the financial sector, and being able to offer a hardened solution that has best practices baked in, I think, offers a great deal of value.
Yes.
So as we start to kind of wrap up just a little bit, if I look at the combination of Veeam and IBM Cloud, first and foremost, it's about protecting the data. It's about making sure that the data is available. It's minimizing data loss. It's minimizing the amount of time that an organization of business goes without their data. It's about layering in management. It's data services, policy-based capabilities to make sure you can get the most out of your data from an availability perspective, but aspirationally, we want to look ahead, and it's not always just about a file was lost or a cyber event took place, although, those things do happen, unfortunately. But I like to always, give a little bit more of a aspirational, positive view that data is critical to every organization. And, Veeam and IBM, we don't know what every business's digital transformation or DX initiative and experience may be, but we do know that it's going to involve data, and we want to persist that, make it protected, make it available, make it incredibly well managed, make it stored properly anywhere in the world in up to 34 different locations. And we want to offer the tool set that allows you to be able to get the full richness of that capability. IBM Cloud does not whitewash over the native capabilities of solutions. We get full access to offer capabilities to now manage data, protect data, but then leverage that data. So new business models, new customer experiences, new ways for an app dev team or a forensic analysis team, an analytics team even, to better understand how they can drive the business forward in these somewhat challenging times that all of us find ourselves in. So I'll leave it there, but Dale, I want to give you kind of a last word. I think you've got a couple of comments that you were looking to make.
Yeah, and this is maybe a little bit more forward, looking view about, what are some things that we can do together to, even address more of customers' needs. And I thought about three things that I thought were very important. So the first one was, I think you guys have done a great job on the VMware side and the non-VMware side in terms of what you do to back up that data. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be kind of cool to leverage and move this into the Kubernetes world, because there's not a lot of solutions that have this in backup. So that was what I was thinking about over the weekend. And on Monday, I saw you guys made a little acquisition with Kasten. So yeah. I'm going to turn the tables just for a few seconds and ask you, tell me a little bit more about that, because we're really excited about that in IBM.
Yeah, it's been some time in development or in the works, but we're very excited on the Veeam and the Kasten side. I would actually say Kasten is almost more Veeam-like than Veeam in some regards, meaning it's a very easy to deploy, very easy to leverage solution, and it's going to bring up a whole new level of workloads for us, but it's not going to layer in additional complexities. I think the joint customers will see a real simple, elegant type of solution that's very much in keeping with that simple, flexible, reliable design tenets I mentioned. But we heard you. We heard you thinking hard this weekend. We needed to respond, so we did. But I think directionally, we know a lot of organizations are looking at the cloud. A lot of organizations, when they do that, they're looking at replatforming or coming out now with containerized solutions. So it's important to address, and I think it's going to be really exciting for all of us to be involved in it.
Yeah, and we're excited about that. And then the last two would be again just emphasizing more about this cyber recovery. So we'll be curious to see as you start to integrate more with immutable costs, what does that mean? But my last one is I got a little bit of a sneak preview on what you guys are doing with Veeam 11, and I'll tell you, I think it's going to fit really well in our solutions. I mean, first of all, how cool is it to have a combined one product with a combined backup and DR solution? Now, I know you do both right now, but the fact that you guys are going to have CDP or copy data protection in there, I think that's so much better because, today you take some snapshots at some interval of time and they get backed up. But for DR, especially for the enterprises that we deal with that have this mission critical type of data, you want to be able to kind of keep as close as possible your production in sync with your DR's backup copy. And I think with your CDP technology, it enables that. And we like the fact that your RPO and RTO times that you're going to get into, that near zero type of recovery. I think that's very, very powerful. And think about what I just showed in that FSS reference architecture in these regulated workloads. How important it is to have that type of capability. So those are kind of like the three things that I had. And then maybe to kind of conclude, just to make two last points. First of all, I really want to compliment Veeam. I mean, I'm so impressed that you guys hit $1 billion in revenue with your software product suite. My hat's off to you. I think that's an incredible accomplishment and something that you should be proud of. And then secondly, I think if I could speak on behalf of all of the IBM people that work with you, we really appreciate the deep partnership with Veeam, the openness, and we look forward to continue to advance things in both of our roadmaps as we go forward.
Yeah, very well said, Dale, and I can definitely assure you the feeling's mutual. Veeam, it takes an ecosystem and it takes great partners. And IBM has clearly been on so many levels a fantastic partner with Veeam, and we look forward to the future as well. That 20,000 machines is nothing to take lightly, especially starting with an install base of 0 not that long ago. But I look forward to a day when we're adding a comma in there, and we're gonna, or maybe even additional capabilities that we haven't even thought of yet. But that's where the future with this partnership can really go, because it's two companies solving real world problems, trying to stay ahead of what businesses require, but not introducing complexity, right? We don't want to lose sight of the pains that have dogged people for decades, literally decades. So very excited for the future with IBM. Very excited for IBM and Veeam to be able to go and solve your real world problems. So for everyone that tuned in, thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you very much, Dale, for all of your time and for a great partnership.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Well, have a great day, everyone. I always sign off with stay safe and stay positive. Until the next time, thanks again.